and then rebuking those who are remaining disobedient to God's word, or of course preaching things against that, or rebuking those who are preaching things that contradict God's word. We discussed how leadership does not only come from formal leadership, but you can also lead by example, so that those younger than you in the faith are able to see your behavior and mimic it. And we also discussed the process of rebuking and admonishment, with discussing how rebuking in the church is generally underused or abused, as in it's either never used or overly used, and very rarely do we see it used properly. So we discussed how a rebuke looks within a biblical context and how those on the providing or on the receiving end should go about the process. Now at this point, we've arrived at the last part of Titus chapter 1, so the last two verses of this chapter. And in verses 15 and 16, Paul makes a reference to perception, which more broadly is a discussion on human nature. So far, the basic flow of chapter 1 has been solution, problem, reason. Paul provided the solution in the opening verses of the chapter, selecting the elders and leadership, and now in verses 10 through 14, he explained the problem. He explained with the description of how the Cretans are behaving disobediently and even heretically. In verse 13, he touched on why he's requiring the rebuking of the Cretans, and it's so that they may be sound in faith. So now in verses 15 through 16, which is what we're covering today, we get to the underlying theological principle that is guiding Paul's thoughts on this situation. So therefore, what we have in these last two verses is the logic that Paul is employing as the foundation of everything he has provided in verses 5 through 14. So he is shutting this chapter down with a discussion on the theological principles that are guiding his thought process here. So if we look at verse 15, Paul explains that to the pure, all things are pure. But to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but both their minds and their consciences are defiled. Now, since there's more information and descriptions given to the latter half of verse 15, to understand what Paul means with the first half of it, I think it's helpful to look at the second half. So as we see, Paul contrasts those who are pure to those who are defiled. So there is an actual contrast or an actual antithesis in this verse. But he actually adds a description to those who are defiled as well. He says that those who are defiled have both their minds and their consciences defiled. So it's this idea of the word for conscience here comes from the Greek word for synodesis, which refers to the ability to discern right from wrong. And the word mind is translated from the Greek word, which means the capacity to reason. And so to Paul, those who are defiled do not have the ability to truly discern what is morally right from that which is morally wrong. Their ability to understand what is holy and what is sinful has been tarnished, marred, and inhibited, if not eliminated altogether. And so this is a discussion of their mental faculties, an actual ability to understand and grasp true spiritual morality. And if a defiled individual cannot properly discern morality, the question then becomes, well, who is this kind of person? So a defiled person cannot understand morality, but how do we identify them? Who is this kind of person? Well, we can understand what Paul is referring to here by the fact that Paul uses two words to describe this kind of individual. He says that they are defiled and unbelieving. So therefore, the people Paul is referring to who have their moral reasoning marred are those who are not believers. The word for defile here means to stain or to pollute. It is also a reference to ceremonial defilement or ceremonial pollution. And so it refers to not just an outward external stain, but it refers to those whose souls are stained or those whose souls are polluted with sin. And those who are stained with sin and have not been washed in the blood of Christ are unbelievers. So the two concepts of being defiled and of being an unbeliever go together, which is why Paul is using both words here. And of these defiled individuals that he's referencing in verse 15, he states that nothing is pure to them. So their consciences have been defiled, their minds have been defiled, their souls are defiled, they are stained with sin, they are polluted with sin, and so it makes sense that nothing is pure to them because they've lost the ability to discern right from wrong. Nothing is pure to them because they are stained with sin. And the word pure in this passage, of course, means unstained. So a person who is stained cannot touch something else without staining it, thereby staining or defiling whatever it is they're touching. And so the idea is that those who are defiled cannot do anything, cannot perform any action that is not stained. They cannot perform any action that is truly and legitimately pleasing to God. So now we have an understanding of what the second half of the verse means. And so we can interpret the first half in light of the second half, which of course is to the pure, all things are pure. So in light of the second half, we understand that this means that to those who are unstained, to those who are believers, to those who no longer have their moral discernment eliminated, they can rightly understand what is pure and what is not. And therefore, they're actually capable of performing pure and sinless acts. But Paul adds in verse 16, that the people who are defiled can and even do profess Christ. But at the same time, they completely go against their own testimony and the Christianity they profess by committing the actions that they're committing. So the theological principle here that Paul is getting at is this idea of human nature and of the distinction between a regenerate and an unregenerate heart. So the unregenerate and the regenerate have a legitimate distinction, and the actions between them should be completely different. And when you have an individual who is claiming to love Christ and to obey Christ, and they are claiming that they are following Christ, but then they are not obeying what the Scriptures say, and they are not walking in active obedience, their actions are contradicting the very words that are coming out of their mouth. And so here is the here is the principle that Paul has been using to guide his thoughts here. Because since the church is the bride of Christ, it needs to be spotless and unstained. And we cannot have blatant sins, heresies, and wicked lifestyles taking place by those who consider themselves church members. And consequently, the double-edged sword of God's Word, when it is wielded by a preacher accurately preaching the Word of God from the pulpit, this will either cause those living a wicked lifestyle to repent or to leave, separating the unregenerate from the regenerate. And that preaching, combined with Christians leading by example, and combined with Christians in formal places of leadership in the church, and combined with rebuking, will draw out that distinction between who is truly saved and who is simply pretending to be, or it will, at least at the very least, keep the sinful lifestyles at bay to prevent them from polluting Christ's bride. The idea is that you will never be able to truly 100% know who is saved and unsaved because we are not God. But the concept here is that with all of this leadership and with preaching and with rebuking and with leading by example and so on and so forth, what you are doing is keeping the sinful lifestyles at bay. You are stopping the wickedness from actually becoming outward, and you are keeping it internalized rather than externalized so that it affects the entire congregation. However, notice in verse 15, because this is an important point. Notice in verse 15 that Paul is not talking about actions. And this is important. He's talking about the mental faculties of the unregenerate. He's not addressing actions. Paul is getting at the underlying cause of the actions that he has already talked about in Titus. And the underlying cause, of course, is the misunderstanding of the Word of God. Whether this misunderstanding is deliberate or if it's due to poor preaching or lack of studying the Scriptures or due to the individual being unregenerate and incapable of grasping such things, it is all due to a misunderstanding of the Word of God. And he talked about their actions in the beginning. He's been talking about the actions of the Cretan church this whole time. So now in verse 15, he's talking about the cause of these actions. He's addressing the actual root cause of all of these disobedient behaviors. And this idea of the spiritual impairments to the mind of the unregenerate is not isolated to Titus chapter 1. Indeed, Paul's a bit concise here in his description. It's only a verse long. And it might not be surprising, though, since he's aware that Titus is familiar with this concept already. Titus is someone that he has personally mentored and trained. And Titus clearly would have an understanding of human nature and a clear understanding of sin. So Paul here is not trying to give him a crash course on hamartiology. His intention here is probably not to teach him these concepts, but to bring it back to his mind, to bring it back to his attention, and to say, and to address so Titus understands the reasoning behind these commands that Paul has given. That the reason I am giving you these commands is because of the distinction between an unregenerate behavior and the behavior of the regenerate. But since this is an underlying theological principle in this chapter, and you will see that this is indeed kind of sets the tone for the rest of the book of Titus. It's also an underlying theological principle for the verses that follow in the next chapter. And so because of this, I want to examine this concept a bit further to grasp its truth. And like I said, it's not limited, it's not isolated here to Titus chapter 1. We find this, I think, also very thoroughly in 1 Corinthians 2, and almost the whole chapter. So if you will turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6, and I will read through verse 16. But remember, we are exploring the concept of spiritual impairment, of this idea of an unregenerate individual's inability to grasp or comprehend the things that are of God. And this is also the same author. So this is Paul speaking as well. And he begins verse 6 in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 with, "Yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away. But we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except the spirit of that person which is in him? So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand the things freely given to us by God. And we impart this in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truths to those who are spiritual. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself to be judged by no one. For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. And we'll end that there. And the underlying logic is, how can someone who is finite understand the infinite? How can someone who is temporary understand what is eternal? How can someone who is mortal understand what is immortal? How can someone who is evil and wicked understand someone who is holy and perfect and righteous? And the answer, of course, if we summarize this entire passage, is you can't. You have to have the Spirit. You have to have God himself reveal these things to you. And so just that entire passage, I think it speaks quite clearly to the effects of sin on the mind. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God. The natural person cannot understand them. It is impossible for this man to understand them, and he cannot understand Christ. He is blind. But not only does the natural man not understand the things of God, this text goes a bit further and says they are actually folly to the natural man. The things of God are erroneous to him. They are astonishing to him. It is utterly perplexing, confusing, and crazy to this man why anyone would actually believe in God. Why anyone would actually believe this. Because these crazy Christians, he says, they believe in this invisible sky fairy, and they have these weird church services and sing all of these weird songs and live these weird lives, and they're so hypocritical, and they all ask for money. They're a bunch of lunatics. And the natural man says these things not because he is stupid. This is also an important point. He doesn't say these things because he's unintelligent. He doesn't say these things because he has a low IQ. On the contrary, there are many people who don't believe in God who are extremely intelligent. There are many people who don't believe in God who are vastly intelligent. And many non-believers are much more intelligent than many Christians. Therefore, it's not so much the portion of the mind that deals with worldly concepts that is marred. Concepts such as those related to business and economics and physics, mathematics, technology, biology, and history, and so on. No, rather it's the portion of the mind that deals with spiritual knowledge. It's the man's ability to understand spiritual concepts and concepts of the infinite that are blinded to him. And so the mind of the natural man is a natural mind. The mind of a worldly man is a worldly mind. The mind of a defiled man is a defiled mind. And because of that, he can only comprehend that which is defiled. And the world is defiled. It is not a perfect world. So he can only understand concepts that are of what is defiled, which is why his mind and his thinking and his knowledge and his faculties can only be used to reason between things that are likewise defiled, which are concepts related to the world. And the intelligence of the natural man rests within a prison, and it is barred off from comprehending the truths of the spiritual world. But not only that, he is blind generally, sure, to spiritual truths, but he is also blind to a specific truth as well, the truth of the gospel. And we see this in 2 Corinthians 4. So please turn there next. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 1. And we'll read through verse 6. Therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart, but we have renounced disgraceful, underhanded ways. We refuse to practice cunning or to tamper with God's word, but by the open statement of the truth, we would commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. And even if our gospel is veiled, It is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Well, and that there as well. But in this text, Paul tells us that the gospel is veiled to those who are perishing. And not only that, but they are blind to the gospel and they cannot see God. So you have this general blinding, and you also have this specific blinding as well. So their minds cannot understand the gospel. And sure, they can understand it intellectually. They can understand it from a knowledge perspective. They understand the concept that Jesus died on the cross for the sins of the world. They can intellectually grasp that. But they can't grasp it spiritually. As in, they can understand it in such a way that it impacts their knowledge, but not in such a way that it impacts their soul. Their soul is not moved to submit to its truth. And the soul is the throne of the will. It is the resting place of the will. The soul is not stirred to repentance, and not stirred to obedience, and not stirred to have faith. And any understanding of the gospel is sheer and mere intellectual assent. Their souls are stained and marred with sin, which tells us the extent of sin and everything that sin affects. And in verse 6 of 2 Corinthians 4, Paul says the solution is that God shines in their hearts. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts, as in the believers' hearts, to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. That is how the knowledge comes, because God shines in the hearts of the unbelievers and allows them to understand the things that are of God. And that, of course, comes through the process of regeneration. But when we combine what we're taught in 1 Corinthians 2, 2 Corinthians 4, and then Titus 1, 15 through 16, we see that sin comes from the mind and results in sinful actions. So to the defiled, all things are defiled, as in all that they conceive is evil. And then that evil that they conceive results in actions. Actions that, as Paul says in verse 16 of Titus 1, these actions deny Christ. Actions that deny their profession of faith in God. A polluted mind leads to polluted actions. Makes complete sense. But when we read this, do not let all this talk of the mind mislead you. Sin does not start in the mind originally. Sin starts in the soul. And that's why in Titus 1:15, Paul uses the word mionino in the Greek to refer to defilement. Because it's not an outward defilement. It's not an outward stain. It's an inward stain. It's an inward defilement. Sin stains the soul. It pollutes the soul, and the effects and evidence of sin are first seen in the mind. And all of us in this room know that. Because that's how human behavior works. You don't behave without any kind of thought. All behavior comes from thoughts, no matter how small or brief those thoughts are, and whether we're even entirely conscious of those thoughts. We might at times act with very little thought, but never with no thought. And those thoughts lead to evil behavior. Thus, an evil soul leads to an evil mind, which leads to evil thoughts, which lead to evil actions. It all starts in the soul. And Jesus confirms this in Mark 7, 21, 23, in which he says, "For far from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within, and they defile a person. So as such, your actions are defiled because evil things come from within. Because of this, if you want to act better, if you want to get in alignment with the Scriptures, if you want to obey God, it all starts with the state of your soul. It has to start there, because that's where everything originates. You can act morally all day long and do ethical things, but if they're not done from a pure and clean heart that hasn't had the stains of sin washed in the blood of Christ, then all of your greatest, seemingly righteous deeds are nothing but filthy rags before a holy God, because they still come from an unclean heart. And that's why in Psalm 139, the psalmist says, "Search me and know my heart. See if there be any wicked way in me." The psalmist doesn't say, "Search my actions and see if they're evil." No, because sin doesn't start with actions. It ends with actions. Sin starts in the heart. It starts in the soul. If sin has got into your actions, it's too late at that point. You can't stop it. It's because it's already started in the soul. So when you pray for the state of your soul. Repent of your sins and pray for the purity of your soul, that it may lead to a pure mind and lead to a pure actions that are holy and pleasing to God. It has to start with the soul, because that is going to be the bottom differentiator between what is pure and what is not. And it is because of that sin-stained soul that actions cannot be anything other than sinful. Because to the sinful man, he despises God. He loathes God. He hates God. Since he cannot understand God and does not love God, not a single action he performs will truly be holy. They might be moral, sure. They might be in accordance with human law, sure. But they'll never be holy, because you can abstain from murder for many reasons other than a love for God. You can abstain from stealing for many reasons other than a love for God. And whatever the reason is, it's not because of a love for God. It is not from a clean and pure heart or a clean and pure soul or an entirely 100% guiltless disposition. Rather, any action that comes out of a heart that is stained with sin will be stained with sin. If my hands are stained with paint, then anything my hand will touch will be stained. This is also why you don't want to, you don't pour glue on your hand and just rub it all across your floor. Likewise, you don't do the same thing with syrup or any other sticky substance, because it's just going to drag and pick up all the dust and dirt and everything that is all over your house. Not only that, it will get all over your walls and your floor and so on and so forth. And nothing stains more than sin. Nothing is stickier than the stickiness of sin. It's going to stick to everything that comes out of you. Every thought, every action. And I get it. This is incredibly strong language. Paul is using incredibly strong language. He says that nothing is pure, as in all things are defiled to a man with a defiled soul. And at this point one may say, well, surely there's an exception. Surely the unregenerate can be pleasing to God. Surely they can be pleasing to Christ. Surely there's a small part of them that can understand God. Surely there's a small part of man that is good and that is capable of loving God. Well, I would argue that Paul's words in Titus 1:15 refute that, and that also based on the relationship between the soul and the mind and actions, we can know that as goes the soul, then so goes the mind, and as goes the mind, so goes the action. And as such, if the mind is stained, then so are the actions. But let's investigate these questions. The idea is man completely evil apart from God? Well, for one thing, Romans 3:23 tells us all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But then also turn to Romans 3:9. Or really the entire book of Romans, I guess. But Romans chapter 3, verse 9. And here, Paul asks, what then? Are we Jews any better off? No, not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin. As it is written, none is righteous. No, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Well, in that passage there, but even that last verse, there is no fear of God before their eyes. It doesn't say there is mostly no fear of God before their eyes. There is almost no fear of God before their eyes. There's no exception. There's no qualification here. He says there is no fear of God before their eyes, period. So based on this passage, who is righteous? None is righteous. Who understands? No one understands. Who seeks after God? None seek after God. Who have turned away? All have turned away. Everyone has turned away. Who is worthless? Everyone is worthless. Who does good? No one does good. Does even one person do good? No. Not a single person does good. And this is all Scripture. And that passage in Romans answers every single one of those questions. And Micah 7:2-4 likewise asserts, the godly has perished from the earth. There is no one upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts the other with a net. Their hands are on what is evil to do it well. The prince and the judge ask for a bribe, and the great man utters the evil desire of his soul. Thus they weave it together. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright of them is a thorn hedge. And then Isaiah 53:6 states, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. Sin is something that stains everyone.
Elijah, reading those passages from the Old Testament, and you read what Paul says here in the New Testament, and we see what's going on. That is a constant throughout history.
Right.
That you see even from the very beginning, you see almost immediately after the fall, when God looks down upon man, every thought, every imagination of their hearts are only evil continually. So this is something that's been a constant throughout the ages of men.
Yeah.
Man's not getting better and better. If anything, he's getting worse and worse. And obviously, in this day and time, we see the evidences of this lack of and the thing about the no fear, I'll let you proceed. The no fear, you think about when men commit these awful sins, murder, all of these rape, and all of these immoralities, and all of these things, do they not fear the consequences
Yeah, I mean, the only thing they try to avoid is the law. I mean, they just try to cover up their tracks, hide the body, hide their sin, whatever, so they can escape the physical consequences for it. But I mean, yeah, even anyone who studies history and you look at history, you know that sin is always a constant. It doesn't matter the century. There is immense sin in every single century of human history. And the only thing that has really gotten better maybe is the laws, because as history has progressed, you have more civilization develop and you have more and more laws that come about. And so the laws help hold that external behavior at bay, but it does nothing for the internal depravity that is still within them. And so while in at least the Western world, while you have a lot of laws that are existent, and so you think, well, if we compare today with what was happening in the past, things seem to be a bit better. The only reason for that is the existence of laws, and so it puts us under the delusion of morality. It puts us all under the delusion that humanity is doing pretty all right. We're doing all right. But that's not the case, because internally man is still wicked and sinful and evil. And just because everyone's not out here disobeying the laws doesn't mean that we're not evil. You take away the physical punishment for breaking a law, and you will have utter chaos come about, because the laws do nothing against man's internal behavior, only their external behavior. But all of this, of course, begs the question of what is the solution? What makes a man or a woman love God? What makes us turn from our wickedness and our evilness? How can a God-hating man turn into a God-loving man? Is there a tiny microscopic portion of an unregenerate man's soul that loves God? Well, no, that can't be it, because Scripture is clear that no one who is unsaved loves God. So that means they cannot love Him even a little bit. Is there a small microscopic portion of man that is not sinful? That way deep down, there's a little light, or there's a little bit of good? No. Otherwise, Scripture would say so. It would say that man is mostly bad, that man is very, very bad, but he has a little bit of good in him still. But Scripture never gives us any kind of description on that. It says that man is evil, man is wicked. There is no qualification, there is no exception. And multiple of passages discuss and confirm the sinful and wicked nature of humans, and not a single one of these passages even hint at ambiguity. They all state man is evil. So the solution is not from man having some minuscule portion of himself that loves God. Then what is it? Is it legalism? Is the solution actually earning salvation through works? Are there things that I can do to earn my salvation, actions I perform? Can I go help out at soup kitchens every day and do it for the rest of my life and get my way into heaven like that? Well, we can't. Actions cannot save us. It would be impossible. It doesn't make any sense, because the soul of man is tainted, and so all of his actions are sinful. That's exactly why legalism doesn't work, because there is no action that can come out of an unclean heart that is going to be holy. Every action is going to be unclean, so legalism cannot save us. So how can sinful actions earn salvation? They can't. They're instead going to earn you damnation. As such, the solution is not found in man. Man is where the problem is. The solution can only be found in Christ. Man cannot look to inside himself for salvation, because it's the man's insides that cause his need for salvation in the first place. Man can only look outside of himself for salvation. There is no other way. Because man hates Christ and cannot understand Him. How can his nature be changed so that he'll seek Christ out? Well, just like we began Titus 1 with Christ meeting Paul on the Damascus Road, it seems fitting that we end Titus 1 with Christ meeting Paul on the Damascus Road. Because just like was the case with Paul, Christ must come to us. Christ must change our nature. Give us a new will. Give us new desires. Christ must destroy our hatred of him, placing within us a desire to love him, a desire to follow him, removing our wickedness, removing our evil desires, giving us a desire to obey him. That is how the defiled become undefiled, how the impure become pure. And when we are given these new desires, when we are made new, when we are regenerate, when we are restored, when we're given that ability to truly grasp and understand and believe in the things of God, and our faculties are constructed in order to grasp what is morally right, then any deviation from obedience to Christ is to return to our old ways. It is to act with desires that were not given to us by the Holy Spirit, which is why they deny our testimony. So we claim to know Christ, we claim to love Christ, we claim we're saved. That means we're claiming to have these new desires, we're claiming to have the desire to obey him, but then we disobey him. That's a complete contradiction. And that's Paul's point. These Cretans claim to be changed internally and to have these Christ-like desires. They claim to want to obey. They claim to want to be holy. They claim that they are obsessed with Christ and that they love Christ, but they're still sinning and warring against him daily. And their lives are living contradictions of the very things they claim to believe. And that is why it's important to examine ourselves. Because remember the Sermon on the Mount, and remember Matthew 7, in which Jesus tells us we will know false prophets by their fruit. Remember the Holy Spirit's work in sanctification, and that he leads us and guides us in producing that fruit, the fruit of the Spirit. Moreover, consider 1 John 2, 4 through 6, which tells us that whoever says, I know God, but does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him truly the love of God is perfected. By this we may know that we are in him. Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. And may that be sobering, but also encouraging. Because if you do not have a desire to obey God, and if you legitimately do not have a desire for him, if obeying him is almost always a burden, then we really need to examine ourselves to ensure that we are actually in the faith. Because his burden is easy and his yoke is light. It doesn't mean you're not going to mess up. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to mess up probably daily. I know I do. But the idea is searching yourself to see if those desires are truly there. Do you have a legitimate and genuine affection for Christ? Do you have a legitimate and genuine desire to be pleasing to him? Not because of any external reward, not because of some kind of social benefit, of your friends thinking that you're holy, or your parents, or your spouse, or anything else. But do you have a desire to please him out of nothing other than the fact that you love him? That is what we need to look at. And that's the other thing that we have to understand, because when we stand before God on Judgment Day, and we stand before his throne and confess our sins and confess our lives and everything else, we're going to be alone. Our spouse is not going to be next to us. Our children are not going to be next to us. Pastor Weber is not going to be next to us up there. It is all us. It's just me. When I stand before God, I cannot use my wife's faith to save me. I cannot use my pastor's faith to save me. I cannot use any of your faith to save me. I cannot use my children's faith to save me. At the end of my life and at the end of this road, the only thing at the end of the day is that Christ was merciful to me, and if I were truly in the faith or not. and I will be completely alone and have nobody else to answer to for that except myself. And so that is why we must examine ourselves. Are we in the faith? Are we truly regenerate? Do we have a genuine love and affection for Christ? And 1 John is an incredible book to help you figure that out. 1 John is an incredible diagnostic tool to discern your faith. So is Matthew 5 through 7. And Titus as well. So use these books to your advantage. Study them. Pray to God. Diagnose whether or not you are truly in the faith, and come to others. Come to your pastor for help. Come to other congregants for help. Come to people that you trust in the faith to help you understand whether or not you are in the faith. That's why we rely on each other, and that's also why we rely on the Scriptures. But with that said, may what is said of the Cretan Church not be said of us. May we examine ourselves to see if we truly are in the faith, and may our actions and desires replicate that which is pure and holy, and not that which is stained and defiled. But I'll end us there.